be refuting the death penalty. My opponent's claim is that the death penalty is insufficient because it fails to deter crime, it keeps costs high, and it is unreliable. My counterclaim is the death penalty has been proven to deter crime, high costs can be avoidable, and is better for society. My opponent's secondary claims are the death penalty fails to discourage further crimes, the cost of the death penalty is far too expensive, and the death penalty is not always reliable. First of all, for my opponent's first claim, the death penalty fails to discourage further crimes, I found evidence that overrides that. According to the NCPA, or National Center for Policy Analysis, between 3 and 18 lives would be saved by the execution of just one criminal. Professors from Emory University performed a nationwide study in 2003 that supported this claim, arriving at the conclusion that, on average, 18 murders are deterred from a single execution. A professor from Emory University states, speeding up executions would strengthen the deterrent effect. For every 2.75 years cut from time spent on death row, one murder would be prevented. Roy D. Adler, professor of marketing, says that recent evidence suggests that each execution carried out is correlated with about 74 fewer murders the following year. Michael Summers, a professor of quantitative methods at Pepperdine University, did a study on the relationship between the number of executions and the number of murders. He found out that after a 26-year period between 1979 to 2004, when the number of executions increased, the number of murders decreased, and vice versa. In my opponent's second claim, the cost of the death penalty is far too expensive. My opponent talks about how death row prisoners add millions of dollars annually to California's budget system. Though my opponent is correct in the fact that the death penalty is costing the government millions of dollars, he's wrong in putting the blame on the actual death penalty. The real budget crisis is in the elongated time spent on death row and the in-prison-for-life inmates. Most of these prisoners sentenced to life in prison die in their cells. The death penalty would make housing more efficient for the prisons, considering each death row inmate is isolated for their entire sentence, and therefore costing the government more money in prison cell funding. With the death penalty, the government would not lose money, but would save it. According to a May 2004 report by the Sentencing Project, a Washington, D.C. research and advocacy group, average time served by those sentenced to life in prison has gone up from 21.2 years to 29 years. The same article states that the number of life imprisonment servers has risen by 25%. Needless to say, with more people taking up space in prison, we have a bit of a problem. Charles Manson, a serial killer who created a cult of brutal murderers, is the perfect example. He's been in jail for over 3 decades, living in the same cell the entire time. If we as a society kept the death penalty, but erased the length of time spent on death row, then the high finances involved would drop. For my opponent's third claim, the death penalty is not always reliable, he mentions that it is completely possible for prosecutors to manipulate evidence. This is true in a sense, but the court systems would not be able to function properly if the prosecutors were all ganging up on the convict with manipulated evidence. There would be no need for a court case at all, as a matter of fact, if the prosecutors already had the sentence hidden up their sleeve. My opponent's evidence that backs up his claim is also rather outdated, most of his information dating back into the late 1970s. There is no doubt that the death penalty can be unreliable, but that does not make it completely 100% unreliable or morally wrong. Lastly, I would like to point out that though the death penalty seems like a crime in itself, in the long run the government is actually doing the public a service. What the media does not tell the public about the convicts sentenced to death row is how heinous their crimes really are. In the Utech versus Brown case, Justice John Paul Stevens claims that Cal Coburn Brown raped, robbed, tortured, and murdered a woman in Washington, and then 2 days later, attempted the same to another woman in California. All this being said, the story seems a little flat and indiscreet, as if parts of it were left out. Now, what really happened was, Brown forced himself to the woman's car, stuck a knife in her face, grabbed her by the hair and demanded she either die or drive. As he's yelling at her and waving his knife in her face, he's rummaging through her purse looking for money. Then he proceeded to drag her to his room, tied and gagged, where he thought it would be entertaining to rape and whip her for over 2 hours. Of course, that was just a preview of what happened. The point being that if the entire story is divulged to the public, then surely they would want something more than a sentence to be done about it. In conclusion, the death penalty is not necessarily a horrible thing. It has been proven to deter crime, the high costs can be brought down, and society can better from it. Thank you.
All right, the advocate's points are labeled pretty well. As you get to each secondary point, you're responding. You've got a lot of counterclaims on each of those points, and you've got a lot of research. In fact, I think you do a good job coming up with counterclaims and research to support your counterclaims. I do think that you might want to engage in attacking the reasoning and the evidence used by the advocate a little bit more. But I think you are well prepared to present some counterclaims. On the first point concerning deterrence, I think you do a pretty good job providing evidence that there is research that suggests that there is an effect that benefits us, so on and so forth. It's kind of interesting to me because you said deterrence a couple of times in the supporting point there, but when you use the term at the beginning and the end of the speech, you say debtor, and it makes me think of that prayer. The Lord's Prayer, only the Protestants say it the wrong way. Forgive us our debts as we forget of our debtors. And I know that that's not what you're talking about. It's just an awkward way of expressing it. Like I said, so you did a good job on that, presenting counterclaims, not necessarily talking about why the evidence that the advocate presented was inadequate and doing a contrast of the evidence that you're presenting to their point. And I think that would strengthen your argument. On the cost issue, you do get into an explanation that there's something about the way the death penalty is administered that produces this cost, but I didn't think it was clear what's going on. And it really is a result of all of the legal battles and the lengthy appeals that go on. You've got the statistic that shows that the average time that people serve has gone up from 21 to 29 years, and I think that's a good piece of information. And that's not because we're killing them for 8 years. It's because we're not allowed to kill them, and it takes a longer time for them to either die in jail or to be executed. And so that's the real cost that's adding this, and those are all a result of the appellate process, not the penalty itself. One thing that I'm curious about is, would that appellate process be different if we didn't have the death penalty? I think you need to make an argument on that point. On the argument about reliability, there's a morality argument that's only partially developed. Here's one place where you do seem to be responding to the evidence that the advocate used and kind of challenging the idea that the data is manipulated or that the prosecutors are doing something untoward, and you suggest that that's really old data. And here's one place that you don't have any information on your own, and so it's kind of obvious that that's in fact what you were doing is, when I don't have any evidence, I'm going to respond by putting those presses up there. I thought you had a good summary of your argument too. All right, thank you.